Hi, Councillor Klassen, are you online?
Indeed, I am.
Thank you. We can hear you perfectly.
Clerks, this is Councillor Boyle. Can I just check my audio?
Yep, we can hear you fine, Councillor Boyle. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, it's 3 o'clock. Why don't we get started? Good afternoon and welcome to the Vancouver City Council Special Council meeting of Tuesday, May the 14th, 2024. This special council meeting is being called by myself as the mayor under sections 2.5A and 14.5 of the procedure bylaw for the purpose of receiving the Provincial Housing Targets Order 6-month interim report. This special council meeting is being convened in person and by electronic means as authorized under Part 14 of the procedure bylaw. If a council member attending by electronic means loses connection during the voting process, team members are available to get you back online quickly while the voting process is suspended. The team members' contact information has been circulated to you. Video of council members speaking, presentations, and vote results will be projected on the live stream when available. Council members are reminded that, in accordance with sections 14.13 of the procedure bylaw, members must enable their video to confirm quorum. In the case of an emergency where we need to evacuate the building, I'd like to point your attention to the exits just through those glass doors and around the pillar there. And then if for whatever reason that door is blocked, there are 4 exits on the side here, and we'll direct you accordingly. There's also a defibrillator at the end of the hallway here, if so need be. We'd also like to acknowledge that we're hosting today's council meeting on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And once again, just want to thank them for their generosity and their hospitality and the love and care they show this land that we get to live, work, and play on. And I do think it's incumbent upon all of us to unlearn what we've learned in the past and learn the true history as to what's happened on these lands. If we do that, we're going to build an incredibly bright future full of love and prosperity for all of us. I also want to recognize our teammates at the City of Vancouver who we've had the pleasure of working with for at least a year and a half now, some of us a lot longer, and I can tell you, super proud to be working side by side with our team. For the public here, couldn't ask for a more dedicated, hardworking group of people that really care about our city. So thank you. On that note, can we please get roll call?
Mayor Sim in the chair, Councillor Carr, Councillor Kirby-Yung,
Present.
Councillor Dominato,
Present.
Councillor Bly,
Present.
Councillor Boyle,
Present.
Councillor Fry, Councillor Montague has a leave of absence for personal reasons all day, Councillor Klassen,
Present.
Councillor Meisner, and Councillor Zhou.
Present.
You have quorum, Mayor Sim.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so the plan for the day. Any comments on the agenda items can be sent to council using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be posted on X at Van City Clerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's longstanding commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including the utmost respect for all genders. I remind council that when addressing speakers and the city's team members, we will avoid using gendered honorifics and will instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. Speakers may speak only speak once and should follow along on X at Van City Clerk for updates on the progress of the meeting so they don't miss their turn to speak. There is one item on today's agenda, Provincial Housing Targets Order 6-month interim report, October the 1st, 2023 through March the 31st, 2024. Council will receive the team member presentation, ask questions of team members, hear from speakers, followed by debate and decision. Council will adjourn or recess by 5 p.m. unless council resolves to extend the meeting before that time. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on this item? Seeing none, we do have team members here to present this item, and so please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Sim and members of council. My name is Dan Garrison. I'm the Director of Housing Policy and Regulation in the Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability Department. My team and I are here today to present to you on our Provincial Housing Target Order and specifically our 6-month interim report for the period from October 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2024. We're here to present that to you and to ask that you direct staff to submit this report to the provincial government in order to comply with the requirements laid out for the city under the Provincial Housing Supply Act and under our Ministerial Housing Target Order. With that, I am going to hand it over to my colleague Edna Cho, who is going to walk you through the report, and then we are available, Edna and I, along with our team, to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Edna Cho, Senior Planner in Housing Policy in Planning, Urban Design, and Sustainability. In this presentation, I'll go over the background of the Provincial Housing Targets Order and the requirements for reporting that municipalities must meet, followed by a summary of our progress after the first 6 months, and conclude with some next steps. There are 2 recommendations in this report. In order to meet provincial requirements, Council must receive for information the Housing Targets Interim Report as attached in Appendix A of the Council report, and to direct staff to submit it to the province by May 15th. There's been a lot of new legislation on housing coming from the province recently, including the Housing Supply Act, which was brought into force in the spring of last year, giving the province the authority to set municipal targets. Vancouver was one of the first 10 municipalities to receive a target order in September of last year, and the goal of the housing targets are to increase and speed up housing supply in areas of greatest need across the province. The housing target that the province set for Vancouver is 28,900 net new units over a 5-year period, and is based on a housing needs assessment that they conducted. They developed a standardized methodology for conducting housing need that they're applying to all municipalities, and the housing target is based on meeting 75% of that housing needs assessment. The target is intended to meet the housing needs of both new households that will be forming or coming to Vancouver over the next 5 years, as well as those that are already in Vancouver that have existing housing needs. In addition to meeting the target, there are also reporting requirements associated with the target order. Municipalities have to submit progress reports annually, as well as an initial 6-month interim report. The reporting period is based on the anniversary date of when the target order was issued, and for Vancouver, our 5-year target started on October 1st, 2023, and ends on September 30th, 2028. Reports must be received by resolution at Council and submitted to the province within 45 days of the reporting period, and we've listed the schedule of when the reports are due in this chart on the left. The intention of the reports are to provide information on whether we can meet the targets, and in the legislation, if a municipality does not meet the target, there are a number of actions the province may take. They can appoint an advisor to review our work, they can make recommendations to meet targets, and at the most extreme, they can require municipalities to add or change bylaws or issue specific permits. The province hasn't indicated that they will take this kind of action at this point, but the legislation does provide them the authority to do so. So what are the targets measuring? They are measuring net new completions. It's important to note that projects reaching completions this year are measuring projects that began construction 2 to 3 years ago and were approved a year or more before that. So these initial years of provincial reporting, while important in establishing a baseline, are measuring previous policy decisions and applications already in the development pipeline. So this means that the impact of policy changes today and projects approved this year will not reach completions until the later years of this target order timeline or into the next provincial target order. Okay, so let's move on to the results of the first 6 months of data. So over the last 6 months, there has been 1,607 net new units completed. We note that there's been a decline in completions over the last 2 years due to a number of factors. In 2019 to 2021, we issued fewer building permits, in large part due to COVID. In addition, there's been a significant increase in construction costs, labor shortages, higher interest rates, to name just a few of the reasons. Although this is tracking below the annual target of 5,002 units, there is an unprecedented number of projects in stream, as well as a significant number of low-density housing units that we project will complete over the next 5 years, totaling over 31,000 net new units, which would meet and exceed the provincial target. So you can see how that's broken down in this pie chart. It includes 8,000 projects already under construction, 14,600 units approved, 4,200 units in application under review, and an additional 4,500 units of low-density housing that we project will complete over the next 5 years. Another way to see what's expected to complete over the next few years is to look at how many building permits we've issued. This is a 10-year trend line, and you can see after a couple of low years in 2019 to 2021, largely due to COVID, we've rebounded. 2022 was a record year of building permit issuance, and so just adding up the permits from 2022 and 2023 will result in over 13,000 units that will be built over the next couple of years. As a caveat, it's important to note that municipalities play a crucial role in the permitting process, especially around approving and issuing permits. However, after approval, there are many factors at play leading to whether and how long it takes for a building to complete that are largely beyond municipal permitting, such as funding, financing and interest rates, construction costs, inflationary pressures, and availability of labor and trades. So that's the progress towards the overall target after 6 months. Let's move on to the breakdown categories. In addition to an overall target, the province also provided us with guidelines that break down the target into further categories, including a recommended number of units by size. So this is a number of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, tenure, that's rental versus owned units, and affordability. So these are defined as below market rental units renting at below Hills rates, as well as units with on-site supports. These additional categories are not requirements. They are guidance at this point, although the province has indicated that they could become mandatory in the future through a revised housing target order. In terms of reporting, municipalities have been provided with a reporting template asking for detailed data to track these additional categories. So let's look at tenure first. Over the last 6 months, 51% of new units completed are rental. The province has set the 5-year target at 72% rental, and we know that in 2023, 78% of all approved housing units were rental. So we'll see these units and this 10-year split become completion in the upcoming years, moving us towards a higher share of rental that will reflect the provincial guidance. In terms of unit size, the provincial guidance is for 39% of all units to have 2 or more bedrooms, including a 22% 3-bedroom unit recommendation. Over the last 6 months, 50% of new units completed have 2 or more bedrooms, including 17% with 3 bedrooms. So turning to the last category, affordability, the province's initial guidance is for 27% of all units, that's about 8,000 units, to be renting at or below Hills, including 3% of those units to have on-site supports. Over the last 6 months, only 11 units, that's 1%, have been completed at this affordability level. So Vancouver has a suite of programs, policies, and incentives to encourage new below-market and non-market housing at various levels of affordability, and we expect a fair volume of these units to complete over the next 5 years. However, delivering rental units at the affordability level set by the province of at or below Hills is very challenging at this time, given rising costs without significant additional investment from senior governments and other partners. So this concludes a summary of numbers after the first 6 months. In terms of next steps, we'll be looking more closely at housing needs in Vancouver and analyzing the projects we have in stream to get a realistic picture of what is possible for the city to deliver. We'll be looking at what partnerships are necessary to deliver more deeply affordable housing, particularly at the affordability levels that the province is recommending. And based on this analysis, we will refresh our own 10-year Housing Vancouver targets and deliver a 3-year housing action plan, which will have over 50 actions to help increase housing supply to ensure that we can meet our targets, including more opportunities for new rental, social housing, and low-density options across the city. This is our timeline for targets-related work for the rest of the year. Today, we're here with the first interim report on the Provincial Housing Targets Order. In June, we'll be coming back with the updated Housing Vancouver 10-year targets and 3-year action plan. And in November, we'll be back to you again on the annual Provincial Housing Targets Order report and an update on the new Provincial Housing Needs Report numbers. In summary, this interim report on the first 6 months of data establishes a baseline for reporting required through the Provincial Housing Targets Order. There's a high volume of housing units in our development pipeline that will result in a lot of new housing units completed over the next 5 years. Work is also underway to refresh the city's own 10-year housing target and to develop a 3-year housing action plan to further increase housing supply and meet our targets. So that concludes our presentation, and staff are available to answer any questions you have.
Great, thank you very much. So Council, you have up to 5 minutes to ask questions of team members, and there are questions. So Councillor Kirby-Young, you're the first one on the
Yeah,
queue.
thanks. Can I move for a second round off the bat?
Sure. Great. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Great. Second round approved.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the report. I'm going to try to drill into it because there's a couple of things obviously that stand out right away. First, with respects to the new Housing Vancouver targets and the report we're getting in June, just looking for clarity around sort of a key distinction between how Vancouver has measured housing progress and what the province is asking for, and that's the difference between completions and approvals. So sort of a two-part question, which is really around, will we see a shift in our targets? Will we shift from completions to approvals or not? What are the challenges and the impacts of that? And then I guess the answer really is that given the lag time in terms of construction and processes, is speeding up permitting and processes really our answer to getting there? Because otherwise, within a 5-year window, we can approve all we want. It doesn't mean it'll be built.
Yeah, there's some complex questions, but the first one to start, I think in terms of our Housing Vancouver strategy, our proposal is to continue to measure housing approvals because that is what the city controls. It's what drives policy change. It's what allows us to look at our regulatory regime and drive change if it's needed. That said, we absolutely are mandated to also track and measure completion. So our proposal is to essentially do both. Approvals are really important. You can't get to construction and completion if you don't make those approvals, and that is what council controls. But of course, you can't live in an approval. So the completions are important too, and we're required from a legislative perspective to measure that.
Okay. So if we are tracking both, then does that, and I brought this question up before, would that give us some sort of more data, not acknowledging difficulties in economic conditions, but this notion of having entitlements for rezonings or approvals expire, that if you don't build by a certain time, whether it's 48 months, whatever that is, that it expire? Are we looking at or contemplating that as an option to close this gap between us approving and something getting built?
It's certainly something we have seen is a length of time between approvals and completions has gotten longer. Sometimes that's related to the construction process right now. Like once folks have actually started construction, supply chain, labor issues, it's taking on average, about a year longer than it used to actually build a building. In terms of the specific question about rezoning approvals, we have looked at that and are continuing to look at ways to speed it up. Certainly time-limited development permits are possible. Time-limited rezonings are more challenging legally, but it is something we're
Okay, and
certainly open to look at.
about on our side, the work that we're doing with 3331 or speeding up process and permitting? Is that, how much can that help to closing the gap?
Well, I mean, the city's main job in this is setting up the regulatory framework and approving the housing. So the 3331 framework and accelerating permit approvals is absolutely essential. We can't get these projects through without that. We also know at a time when construction costs are escalating at the rate they're escalating, interest rates are what they are. Speeding up approvals has a lot to do with helping
Viability
get
of
those
projects.
projects move.
Okay,
as
I
well.
want to switch gears with my time right now to affordability, and I think this was flagged as an issue with the province's pretty significant target of about 27% at Hills, and we're showing 1%. And I realize it's a snapshot in time; it's only a moment. But isn't housing a team sport? And the city only has a certain amount of levers over affordability. So when you said you're going to be looking at further analysis and coming about the number of tactics, is that one of those going to be that the province needs to pony up and invest in the affordability in the housing? Because how else are we going to achieve that at the same time we have development community saying how hard it is to deliver our existing 20% below market?
Yeah, that's right. And we've done similar analysis looking at the provincial targets and how difficult it's going to be to hit that level of affordability. So certainly it's not going to be done by the city on its own. We have a role to play. But generally, there is going to need to be funding and financing available from senior levels of government.
So can we expect a report that will specifically articulate that Vancouver's ability to deliver on the province's target is dependent on the province actually investing in affordable housing more?
Yes, and in fact, we're working with our colleagues in finance right now to look at what the sort of investment, the order of magnitude investment that would be required to do that would be. So that will be part of the report back in June.
It will be part of the report. Okay. I just want to jump a little bit into this notion of sort of unit size and sort of high proportion of studios that are required in Vancouver's require family units. We're doing pretty well on that. Do we see any need to shift on unit mix, or do we see that Vancouver's needs align with the tenure, the unit types that are specified? And I can come back on for that answer because I'm at time.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Great. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Mayor. So just and since Councillor Kirby-Young actually brought up the percentages of units for studio, one bedroom, and two, are we? Do these percentages align with kind of market trends, or are we leaving it to governments to choose the actual percentages?
So that's a good question. The way that the province decided on this share is based on looking at census trends, past census trends of the whole stock that they then applied to this new housing target. So it's not based on any capacity analysis, economic testing, or market trends. So overall, we would say in terms of the unit mix that was given, the studio 1 and 2 beds, I think we will be around the range. It's really going to be that 3-bed unit mix that's going to be difficult to achieve. The unit mix is for 22%. Typically, we're seeing about 7% in the rental stock being delivered and about 13-14% in the condo stock. So those are the market trends, but it's also, we know through economic testing that the 3 bedrooms are very difficult to achieve in rental.
Okay, thanks very much. Just in your presentation, slide 11, you don't need to pull it up, is just the number of actual building permits issued per year. We saw a spike up to over 7,700 in 2022, and then down to 50, around roughly 5,900 in 2023. Can you explain that spike? Was that a little bit of pent-up demand built up after the pandemic, or are we on track to either match or get close to that again?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of pent-up demand from the COVID years, which were lower for sure. But it's also because we do have a lot more approvals in our pipeline than we have, in years before. So, that is something that we're trying to do as staff in terms of our own targets, is to ensure that, we are approving lots of units so that there's lots of units that can go through the process.
And the actual getting to approve building permits is clearly something that council and staff have been really working towards. So we're not doing anything differently, or perhaps we are improving that process. I'm just trying to figure out why the number kind of dropped during 2023, and just wondering how we're looking for 2024.
We don't have the projections of the building permits in 2024 or 5, but we can get that to you, or we could also bring that back in June for our in our June report.
Okay, I'll just shift gears a little bit. So when it comes to, I'm looking at that Hills number and realizing that, we're off to a rocky start for that one. Are the provincial authorities in the mood for any kind of trade-offs to try and achieve these sort of gross numeric targets? We are hearing a lot about projects that are not penciling right now from the industry. Is it kind of a raw number of units that they're looking for, or what kind of conversations are happening with the province on that?
Hi, thanks, Councillor Dan Garrison. Certainly we are well below the target in this first 6-month period. I would say it is just a 6-month snapshot. We do have a significant amount of non-market and below-market rental in the pipeline, so we do expect to do better. That said, the targets are going to be really challenging to meet. It is, as you say right now, quite a blunt instrument. It's quite a blunt number. But I would say the province understands there's a lot of room in this process for explanatory factors, for being able to have conversations between the city and the province about why we are or are not meeting targets, by what could be done to do better. One factor in this is we agreed with the province that we wouldn't deal with the issue of SRO replacement as one example, because we are basically the only municipality in the province with a significant number of SROs. So we sort of set that to one side. There is another process to deal with that, which is going to result in, we hope, a significant amount of deeply affordable housing. So there are conversations certainly going on. The province is aware that number is going to be difficult to meet without significant funding. And so I think while it's a blunt number, there is going to be some flexibility to work together towards the best we can.
Okay, at my time. Thanks very much. I'll come back on.
Thank you very much. Councillor Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. So my question is, it seems like we are underperformed in the first 6 months. The yearly target is 5,200. Even the 6 months we do divided by 2, that's 2,600, and we complete 1,600. I understand you are saying we have 31,000 units in the pipeline, but when are we going to see a boost in terms of the completion? Do we have a projection?
I would start by saying I agree with you that the first 6-month period, you're interpreting it correctly. We haven't hit the targets. We don't look like we're on track to this year, so that is something that is of concern. We are looking at overall in aggregate, expecting to be able to meet the targets over the 5-year period. But I would say there is still work to do, and the work around the permit improvement process, the work to accelerate and respond to the provincial legislation that will result in more housing supply. So all of that work is to be done, but I'm suspecting Edna has a number that she's going to be able to offer.
Maybe not an exact number, but this year in 2023 there are 8,000 housing starts. So those will start to become completion over the next 2 years. And those 2 years of building permits, record levels in 2023 and 2022, add up to about 13,000. So you are going to see those in, probably 2026, 2027. You'll see it rise next year, but, you'll see it over the next 2-3 years.
Okay, so it seems like the real impact we are not able to see that until 2026, looks like. Okay.
And that will depend on how quickly the projects complete. They've started, but with construction cycles, it can depend. They can take 2 or 3 years to complete. So we will see those in the next couple of years.
Okay, thanks. The other question is, I realized that our volume at the public hearing has been decreasing this year. Is that because of people waiting for the provincial transit-oriented areas policy? So they're waiting for the policy to submit more application, or do we have any idea what's going on there?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily seeing that it's related to the provincial legislation, but we have seen a smaller number overall, but we have also seen some very large rezonings come through public hearing. For example, the Skeena Terrace rezoning with 2,000 units of non-market housing. So sometimes there's a lot of work in a relatively small number of applications that can deliver a lot of housing. I mean, the word we like to use is cyclical, right? These things sort of come in cycles. Sometimes they come in waves. But I think you're correct. There's been a smaller number of projects moving through public hearing this year.
Okay, so one more question regarding the, I'm thinking about this analytically. So if we have an inflow and we have the turnover over there and we have the throughput, the inflow right now is 31,000 units, and the completion is what we are trying to be measured, which is the outflow. And if we speed up the process here, which achieve 3331, that would of course increase the throughput. So do we have a projection that if we achieve 3331, what will be the throughput?
That's a really good question. I don't think we've done that analysis, but I think that's something that we could take away and think about how to apply that sort of logic, because I think it's good logic. There are, of course, other factors. It's not just our permitting process. So, the macroeconomic climate, et cetera, that does affect housing starts and completions. But that's an interesting way of looking at it that we can take away for sure.
Thank you. I will be very interested to see that numbers. Another questions. I think after the BP, there are also some other things we can control. I heard there will be some delay for the sprinkler permit, like the occupancy permit. What we have done to solve that piece, that's something actually within our control to speed up the process.
Yeah, we might have to come back to you on that one. That one's a little, unless Paul Mokry has.
Yeah.
Thanks. So there's a lot going on in terms of permitting timelines. So we're coming back to council in July with a substantive update on all the work that we're doing on permitting. So I would suggest that we can provide that detail at that time, or if the sprinkler permitting is one that we have actually made some significant changes to.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
The vast majority of our sprinkler permits now are being auto-issued, so a dramatic reduction in time for that particular permit. Of course, that's just one of many aspects of the process that we're working on. But again, council will get a more comprehensive update on that in July.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. I don't have time. I'm going to come back. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Meisner.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Dan, for the presentation. I wanted to zero in on the factors that are within the city's control. It's evident that we can do everything we can to expedite permitting, to get approvals done, but we don't have any control over when shovels are in the ground. So my question is around what tools do we have to move these approvals to completions? You mentioned time-limited development permits being a possibility. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of that and why we haven't executed on that idea.
I mean, to some extent we have. I mean, we do have development permits that do expire and folks need to reapply. So there is an element there. A lot of times the applicants are actually quite motivated to try to get to shovels in the ground. And so there's sort of a question about carrots versus sticks, right? And so that to me is part of it too, is making sure that we set up our regulatory regime in a way that does incentivize the projects getting to development as quickly as possible and doesn't put in the way any barriers. So if you think about the permit improvement process we're going through right now, the amount of time we spent going through our schedule of conditions that we put on development and reducing those conditions, that's a huge help in terms of getting projects moving forward after they've been approved, and because we're not putting in place those barriers. So that's the sort of kind of thinking I think that at the local level we need to be doing. How do we really get out of the way?
Okay, I agree. Okay, thank you for that. How about some of the work we're doing around the view cone review, for example, around the citywide design guidelines, including shadows and floor plates? Do you have an expectation that some of that work will help bring more projects forward?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a real background of a lot of design guidelines, for example, built up, many pages of design guidelines. And so bringing those forward, bringing them together, keeping the ones that make sense, removing the ones that are sort of out of date or don't make sense is going to be really helpful in terms of getting projects through the process. In terms of things like review of view cones, there are definitely going to be view cones that the team is looking at where they are limiting development opportunities and where maybe the views that they're protecting are not the most important views. So that's a process that's going to be a really interesting one for the team to work through and bring back to council.
Okay, so you're optimistic that some of those changes will contribute to us being able to meet these targets in terms of completions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the challenge with completions is that, as Edna was outlining, you know, we're measuring projects that were approved 4 or 5 years ago. And so some of those policy changes we're making today are going to be how we meet our targets in the next target order period. So they're really, really important. They're going to help us move forward. But are they going to impact our targets, completion numbers for next year? Maybe not, but maybe a few years from now, absolutely critical to meeting our targets.
Okay. And do you have any sense of the second half of this year, how it's going to look for us in terms of completions? Because we're measuring just the first 6 months right now. Just wondering if we're expecting the second or the next 6 months to be better or similar.
Well, I think the team's projecting that this year is going to be a little bit on the low side on the completions side. And so we're looking at, you know, that sort of picture improving over the next couple of years after that. Again, it's that we're sort of seeing completions now based on projects that started during that very low period in 2019, 2021. So those are the completions rolling through. It's going to be sort of 2026 probably that we start to see big increases in the numbers of completions.
Okay, great. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carr.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So first question, affordability. Affordability is really set at the Hills rate in terms of the government mandate. I noticed that 99% of our rental units in the last bit were at market rate. Only 1% renting at Hills, 11 units. So how do we get that shift to happen?
So maybe just one clarification. We have a lot of social housing projects in the pipeline currently. So within the 31,000, we have 3,500 units that are social housing. It's just that the city's definition of social housing is 30% of the units are at Hills. So the rest are below market, but they're not hitting that provincial recommendation of at Hills or below. However, we won't know until those projects complete what is the affordability level, because we also know that sometimes the funding, they exceed that minimum definition of social housing, but that's not known to us until later in the process.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of below market rental units in the pipeline as well, and some of those, the studio and 1 bedrooms, they also will meet the below Hills definition. So we do have those units in the pipeline.
Okay, so here's a even trickier question. I was looking at the Metro Van Housing Data Book at the average renter households in Vancouver by unit size and that kind of thing. So although I get the Hills definition and understand how we use it, even Hills means that at the average income of the households that are currently renting, they're not going to achieve affordability. And especially if we think of affordability as paying 30% of an income, the CMHC definition. So, I mean, how do we get there? Is it working with nonprofit societies? Is it getting more senior government money? I mean, the market, I guess, are you thinking the market can deliver this or not? We have to go some other route.
I think probably the answer to the question is we're going to need all of those things. We can't be too rosy about it at this point, right? With what folks in the city and region are out there going through, like we are in a deep hole here, and you know there were, as we've talked about many times, sort of 30 years of inaction by all levels of government on the housing issue. And so that's sort of where we're in the situation we're in. It's going to take us a little while of consistent concerted action to get out of it. Mm-hmm. But we need the community housing sector, nonprofits and co-ops. We need all levels of government. We need faith organizations. But we certainly also know that all of that adds up to about 9 or 10% of the housing in the city. We're going to need the private sector to participate as well in order to deliver the supply. that we need and try to leverage as much affordability as we can out of that.
Got it. All hands on deck. Also, you mentioned, I think, another about the number of units that are studio units versus other size units. I'm just wondering, in terms of that, is for like, what was it in the last bit? 18% of units were studio, 40% is the goal. Do you think that 40% is the right goal for the people that we have in this city? Is that going to accommodate people? I mean, in terms of right supply?
It is a really good question. Like I think from a pure market demand perspective, studio units can be attractive because they're more affordable. I think there's a question about livability and people wanting one-bedroom units, so that's an interesting balance. I do think you could fill a lot of small units in the city if that was all you built. The question is, what would the outcome of that be and what would the resulting city be? So that's where we're trying to build in and agree that the provincial targets around the family mix are somewhere in and around the same as we were targeting. So might be a little bit of difference between 2s versus 3s, but it's in the ballpark.
Yeah. Okay. These are all challenges, I know.
Yeah.
Rentals. 51% of new homes are rental. The target's 72%. I know the market the developers in the past have tended to want condos. Maybe that's shifting. I mean, they get usually more. It was easier to sell, etc. But are we going to be able to get to that? I mean, will the developers want to shift that much into rental rather than condo?
I mean, we've seen a really significant shift towards rental housing, where in our last approval period in 2023, we saw, I think it was 78% of the housing we approved was rental. That's partly a result of policy, partly a result of the city shifting things, partly a result of market conditions sort of moving away from the attractiveness of strata condo for the time being. Making rental more viable, but it's going to be.
Sorry.
We're going to have to keep focused on that in order to deliver.
Dan, sorry, we're at time, but.
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll get back.
Great. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks to staff for the report and presentation. A couple of questions. One, just sort of stepping back, going in terms of the framing that we're dealing with, the province setting targets for municipalities, the feds adding conditions to housing grants. From your perspective, was Vancouver ahead of the game? We're talking about meeting the targets that they presented in the fall, but it strikes me that we had a housing strategy that was implemented in 2017. Do you feel that some of this was more targeted at other municipalities that didn't have a similar housing strategy in place?
I think that's certainly true to some extent. I mean, we've had housing targets in place since 2012. We've been working towards a sort of a metric-based approach to delivering and meeting our housing needs for a very long time. To some extent, I think the provincial approach they've taken was built off of and expanded on some of the things we were already doing at the city. So I do think from a big picture perspective, while all of these things can create, whether it be the provincial requirements or the federal sort of linkage between investments and housing supply, can create some challenges for us. I think in the big picture, it's a positive overall direction because it is going to level the playing field and ensure that, we're all working towards similar goals around addressing our housing needs and challenges.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for reflecting on that. I have a couple more questions. One specifically, the targets that were set for Vancouver. I was looking at the percentage for studio and one bedroom. And it struck me as quite high, and fewer 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units. And often the conversation comes up is, well, are we not building sufficient family style housing in the city? Could you comment on that?
So in terms of the targets, we at the city have a 35% rezoning policy for family housing, where we require 35% of the units to be 2 or 3 bedroom. And that's, we've set that target for new housing because we believe there's a need to provide that in new units, but also because that's what the market can achieve, particularly for rental. It is, although I think we would all like to see more 3-bedroom units, it's quite difficult to meet in rental buildings. It is important to note, though, that for the low-rise options, we are seeing a lot more 2 and 3 bedroom units. Over 50%. Sometimes, almost all of them are the over 2 and 3 bedrooms. So that is where you're seeing the family units. It's just that it's difficult to achieve in the rental units. Noting, of course, also that is also the share that we're trying to drive towards the most in the next 5 years.
Okay, in the same vein, I was looking at the provincial targets around the supportive housing units and noting that they're not included in the rental, so they're outside of that. It's, I think, 583. Is that in line with what we project we need for supportive housing in the city? It struck me as rather low.
So it actually is included in the rental target, just as a clarification. In terms of, is that what we need? I think in terms of our numbers, we do project a higher need for supportive units in terms of the population and our own housing needs that we're looking at right now.
Okay, so is it included in the Hills numbers in the 7,894?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the clarification is it is. I see the table there on slide 14. It does.
Page
it does.
5 or
Does
slide.
yeah? It does break it out for sure. It is included in the overall rental number, but in the breakdown, it's broken. You're right. It's broken out. And I would just say, while I think maybe that number is. It does sort of look low when you first look at it. One of the things we've noted over the years, and particularly recently, is that there's been a significant supply of the supportive housing that exists in British Columbia and in the region is located in the city of Vancouver. And one of the things that's interesting to us about this approach is these similar supportive housing targets are going to be set for municipalities across the region, across the city. So I think from a sort of, if you will, fair share approach of where services and supports for people who are experiencing homelessness are provided, this is going to be overall net positive for the city to have that approach factored in.
So we're at time.
Okay, thanks. I'm at time. Thank you.
Awesome. Councillor Fry.
Wow, voices sound pretty rough there, Ken. Go Canucks.
Yeah, go Canucks, go.
Okay. All right. So expanding on some of what Councillor Dominato was sort of getting at, just as far as the nature and extent of these changes that the province has brought around, I've heard from other municipalities in my work at UBCM that it's actually impacting their planning departments in a pretty significant way, and they're unable to process applications. Is that impacting us at all, or is this just a smaller municipality issue?
I don't think we're experiencing any challenges with that. I mean, one of the things we are working through with this is that not all of this data is available to us in our permitting process, and so we are having discussions between our team and between our team in DBL that processes the permits about how could we access this data without slowing down the permitting process. So there are those kinds of challenges, but we're going to work through those in a way that doesn't impact permit processing. If you think about like of course, the broader changes that the province is bringing in with all the legislation are pretty transformational, fundamental shifts in how planning is done, and we are going to have to carefully build those into the process.
But it's not. These numbers aren't necessarily a reflection of all that churn and change and challenge to adapt.
No, that's right. Although I do think that some of the pieces that the province are bringing in are going to create opportunities for increasing supply to transit-oriented area legislation, for example.
6 of one, half dozen of another. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Expanding on some of Councillor Carr's stuff, and you know me, I'm always challenged with sort of definitions around social housing, affordable housing, the hills definition, and I'm just to read from the definition of hills. Hills are based on figures established by the CMHC, identified to reflect the minimum income required to afford appropriate accommodation in the private market. So really, hills aren't necessarily, to my interpretation of how they interpret it, isn't a real reflection of affordability per se. It's a reflection of market. Is that?
I mean, that's correct. The assumption underlying the housing income limits is that if you have an income above the housing income limit, it means you generally can afford housing in the private market and therefore don't need to rely on social or subsidized housing to access housing affordably. So that's why it's set in that way. You're right. It's basically takes the average rent, what's the income required to afford that, and if you're below that income level, you can get access to subsidized and social housing. That's sort of the general.
Yeah, no, and I wanted to just
No, you're
spell it out and clarify it, because if market is up here and median income is over here, where do we measure median income affordable housing?
well, and it is one of the reasons why when we come back in the Housing Vancouver strategy, we don't rely solely on the housing income limits. We actually break out income sort of buckets. What do we call them? Quintiles or quartiles? Anyway, we break out how buckets of incomes and then try to create housing strategies to address people in those incomes. Some of that is related to the hills, but not entirely.
Any updates on the new structure for inclusionary zoning resulting from the changes to ACCs?
Not yet. we're just learning about it ourselves, right? So that's come out. That's definitely going to be work that we need to do over the next year or so, is to build our sort of inclusionary program and transition it over to relate to the new requirement to adopt inclusionary housing bylaws and whatnot.
Okay, last one from me, and I hear anecdotally that a lot of the 3 bedrooms don't go to families at all, that they go to adult roommates who want to share housing and co-housing and that kind of thing. Is there any accuracy to that? And is there an ability for us to put covenants on family housing to ensure that it is and recognizing human rights and et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some truth to that, absolutely. But I would say that we did this analysis a few years ago. We haven't redone this in a little while, but what it showed is the percentage of units that are occupied by families with school-aged children goes down as you get into smaller unit types. So even market-oriented 3 beds have more families than 2 beds, and 2 beds have more families than 1 beds. So it's not everyone in those units, but certainly there's a higher proportion of families that live in the larger unit sizes. The other piece is, I'd say, around covenants, is we do have the ability to do that when the city is sort of, if you will, giving something or incentivizing something. So, for example, in our below market rental programs and in our social housing programs where we do provide incentives to those applicants, we do have requirements that the unit type is matched to a household that needs that unit type.
Great. Sorry, we're at time. Thanks. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to kind of delve into the construct around the general state of the economy and sort of the timeline and sort of the lag states, if you will, between things being delivered. So I'm looking at page 6, for example. It says analysis of the city's pipeline of in-stream projects indicate new supply shifting towards rental. That's great. Family size units, that's great. That's what we wanted to do. We had the highest share of purpose-built rentals, and it talks about how much is in the pipeline already in terms of thousands of units that were being constructed or that will be completed. I guess my question is, that was before, they're coming to fruition now. What do we need to be concerned about, and should we be concerned about? Because I think in terms of what's coming forward or is being held up because of cost escalation, labor shortage challenges, financing, that kind of thing. And, I think about, this is my second turn on council now. I know when it's busy and I know when it isn't and when stuff's hitting us. And our public hearing schedule is really quiet. We used to have 2 public hearings every council cycle. Now we have 1 or 0. And so I'm looking, what do we need to be looking at towards going forward? Because we might meet some of these targets with the lag, but are we going to have a gap in a few, 2 or 3 years based on the cycle?
Yeah, and that, I mean, it is something we're worried about too, and we're going to have to monitor very carefully. And I'm looking at sort of the pie chart on how much we have in the pipeline, the 8,000 units under construction. Once it's under construction, it's pretty much all the financing in place. Everything is more or less good to go. But there's 14,600 units that have been approved and haven't yet started construction, and those are the ones where you start to think, is cost escalation or interest rates going to be a factor in that? This is one where I think this is where we need all levels of government coming together to look at this as well. For example,
So I guess a two-part question, just
Yeah.
to channel where you're going with this, is are
Yep.
we at risk of approved projects not completing? And are we at risk of not getting enough new projects in the pipeline
Yeah.
because of the economic factors?
on the approved projects not starting construction, I'm generally not comfortable and confident until the financing is signed off and the shovels are in the ground. So yes, we're always at risk of that, and we do need to keep monitoring that and keep talking to the industry about where they're at, where their pressures are. On the other one about the pipeline, I think one of the things that's interesting is if you look at the amount of projects we have in application right now, there's actually a really significant amount, particularly in areas like the Broadway plan. So while I appreciate right now we're seeing a bit of a slow time in the public hearing schedule, my expectation is it's going to pick up as a result of those projects coming through.
Okay, so we're going to prevail despite the economic conditions? Is that too general a statement?
Well, it's maybe too confident of a statement, but I think we're hopeful that we have good policies in place, that we have good opportunities for development. Our permit processing is improving. Like the things that we can do, we're doing, and we're working hard. There's still a lot more to continue to focus on, but the economic conditions are challenging.
So on the economic piece, and just really into what you said the permit process is improving. Are we quantifying how much that is saving on a monthly basis? Like say an approval is done in 3 months versus 6 months versus 12. Or do we have sort of live information? Because I hear from industry all the time, my carrying costs are X per month.
Yeah.
And that can make the difference in the viability of a project. So are we quantifying that, and how important does that mean the permitting effort is?
I haven't seen the math on it yet, but it is certainly something that we can take away and look at. I mean, we agree with them. Carrying costs are high, and also the fact that right now we're in a period where construction cost inflation is so significant and so rapid that those carrying costs are added to. So those, I think, are things that could be quantified, and we can take that away.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, just a quick couple of questions regarding our targets again. If these targets were created during slightly different economic conditions, do we expect these targets to be adjusted anytime during this time period, or are they kind of set in stone at this time?
Yeah, the targets are basically set in stone for 5 years. I would say 5 years isn't that long of a period for the reset, but they are set in stone for 5 years. The opportunity we have, again, is the sort of opportunity to talk with the province and include in our annual reports sort of the explanatory notes about what's going on in the market, what actions the city's taking to try to achieve them. So that's, I think, where the flexibility lies. But the targets themselves, we expect to be fixed for the 5-year period.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to try and get through my sort of 3 questions here at a time. We talked about large sites, the Skeena site. We have a number of large sites. Do we think we should be prioritizing some of those large sites, possibly to try and help us achieve these targets?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we often do have, because large sites bring complexity as well in terms of design. You're doing structure plans, not just site plans. So we often do have specialized teams assigned to them, and they are prioritized. You know, the sort of challenge of it is with a completions-based target is large sites are great and often are able to deliver a lot, but they often deliver it over sort of a longer period of time. So it's an interesting question. Yeah.
Okay. I asked you in the previous questions about trade-offs. UDI just sent us a letter about a relaxation, a temporary relaxation of below market rental and inclusionary units. Is this something that we would conscience as a way of just to kind of get those numbers up to begin in the short term?
We absolutely can look at that as on a sort of go forward basis on the policy. It's what's more challenging is looking at projects that have already been approved and already have legal agreements in place and all of that. Sort of walking that back and undoing it is legally quite onerous. On a go forward basis, we can certainly look at what our below market rental requirements are and what makes sense sort of through financial testing and analysis and work with the industry.
Do we have concerns about we're competing across the board with a lot of municipalities who are also faced with these targets. Are we going to be in a crunch when it comes to labor, materials, potentially inflated costs during this?
Yes. I think we are. There's a lot of supply coming forward across the region, and that's a good thing to address the housing crisis that we're all facing. But it does both in terms of labor, in terms of materials. There is an inflationary effect on housing, on construction cost. Yeah, so that is a challenge that we are facing. Yes.
Fantastic. Last question. I got about a minute and a half here. What other ways have we been working with the development industry to try and hit these targets? What are we hearing from them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the development industry is absolutely crucial to meeting these targets. I think what we hear from them right now is there's a fair amount of uncertainty in the market, like both in the sort of ownership condo market. There have been significant shifts in that market, which is making it hard to finance and get projects moving. And on the rental side, a lot of the cost pressures that are challenging. So that's something we do meet with the Urban Development Institute through our liaison meetings on a regular basis, and we get market updates from them. So working with them to make sure we're gearing our land use policies and approval processes to work for them as much as possible is absolutely going to be critical.
Okay. Thanks very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. A couple of quick questions. So I realize we have 426 demolitions in the first 6 months. How do we count those demolitions? For instance, if there's land with, there are 5 demolitions, single house, to build a strata rental unit. Do we count as 5 demolitions? Or if they have multiple suite, for instance, if they have a secondary suite, do we count 1 or 2?
It's a unit number, so we count the unit and then we net it off.
Okay, so even if they have a secondary suite, we only count 1. Okay, thank you. The other question is, does the illegal short-term rental convert to long-term rental? Would that consider as the target?
That I don't think was factored into
Okay.
the province's thinking.
Okay, yeah. Last question. So I think the completion on the indigenous reserve is not counted, right? Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, like for instance, Sunak is not counted, but Jericho would consider because that's
Yes, they would be. Yeah.
okay. Perfect. That's all the question. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Councillor Carr.
Yeah, just 2 more questions left. Thank you. You know, I still think there's a huge challenge regarding the problems the industry is facing, like with interest rates, the supply chain, financing, construction costs, labor availability. So I'm just looking right now for, on public record, what your thoughts are in terms of a prognosis of, what do you think? I mean, you must be talking to your colleagues. Is it still going to be challenging? Are we still going to be, facing a problem around supply because of that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really challenging time to offer a prognosis on this. I think there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. For example, we've been hearing about these challenges it's not brand new, like the interest rates were increased after COVID to start getting inflation under control. Construction costs were going up then. And then last year in Metro Vancouver was a record year for housing starts. So there's a lot going on right now that's hard to reconcile, and I think we're just going to have to keep monitoring it really, really closely. And maybe that's a positive coming out of this, and having to come back and report to you on a regular basis on these targets, is we can factor that into the monitoring and reporting.
And is the province sympathetic to understanding that challenge?
I think they are, and I think what the province is looking for, if it's not too bold to say, is that the municipalities are clearly demonstrating that they're trying. And in all of our conversations with the provincial staff and in what we've heard from provincial politicians, I don't think they doubt the effort that's being put in at the City of Vancouver to try to address these issues.
Okay, final question. It wasn't so much a housing crisis when I was in the market first to buy my first home. And there was a lot of government subsidy at that time, a lot. I mean, so too, CMHC was much more active in the market. They were building co-op housing, etc. What are the conversations going on about how, and should I just say too, when I look at other municipalities that are even not here in Canada, but in Europe, that people keep touting, like, can't we be like Vienna? It's all federal government money that is really supporting Berlin, Vienna, Copenhagen, etc. So what are the conversations happening around the federal government and the province stepping, even though they've increased, even increasing more and stepping more up to the plate on funding, especially below market housing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the federal government really, in the first half of my career working on housing, wasn't even a factor. We didn't even know who to call in Ottawa about this. So as of 2017, with the introduction of the National Housing Strategy, we have forged much better relationships with Ottawa. We have seen the introduction of programs that have certainly contributed. We see them matching funding with the provincial programs now, the provincial programs that tend to be more the deep subsidy programs that you're talking about, and the federal government more layering in that low-cost financing that's really important to get the projects going. So I don't think it's by any means perfect, and there's certainly more that could be done and needs to be done, but I certainly think we're at a point where the three sort of levels of government, primary levels of government, are more aligned than I've seen them in my career on what the problem is, what needs to be done to solve it. Funding is always going to be a challenge, and unfortunately right now it's especially a challenge given the cost of construction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's for my question.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Mayor. And actually, it was a perfect segue to my last questions. Going back to the subject of affordability is, I guess the takeaway for today in terms of the interim report that you're providing us, the provincial targets, is that with the target, the percentage of units renting at or below hills that's reflected in the report and is part of the provincial targets, is that we're not going to be able to achieve that alone without provincial and federal government assistance. Is that sort of the takeaway from?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true. I mean, to achieve those targets, the municipality has a certain amount that we can contribute, and then we have always relied on investments from senior levels of government to deliver the affordability. I think we'll come back in a lot more fulsome detail on that at the end of June with our more fulsome report on our updated housing targets, but that's generally the case, yes.
Okay, thank you. That brings me to my other question, which is there an opportunity, and maybe it will be reflected as in your June report, of partnering with the province to advance offsite construction to address some of the affordability issues, but also the labor shortage issues? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, there certainly is an opportunity there. And in fact, the province has been involved with a Metro Vancouver-led process to look at how we can better align and incentivize offsite construction, as well as looking at working with municipalities around what we could do around our zoning and guidelines and our sort of regulatory framework to pave the way better for offsite construction. So that's certainly a tool that we're looking at. I know Lisa Helps and the BC Build program have been involved in those discussions. And so working through Metro Vancouver, we are looking at opportunities for that, and the province is at the table.
Okay, that's great. I'd love to see that reflected in our June update as well. And then my last question is, as we embark on our initial year of reporting to the province on the housing targets, what kind of conversations have staff had about commitments from the province around infrastructure to support that housing density? I've heard today that we've got a lot of units in the pipeline that we think we can achieve overall the net number of new units. But what does the conversation look like around the supporting infrastructure, underground infrastructure, other community infrastructure that's needed to support new housing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's a conversation we have in almost every meeting we have with provincial and federal staff on these issues, that certainly we can accelerate permit approval processes. We can amend zoning to enable more housing. But especially as we shift our housing supply response towards more affordable, more rental housing, we just don't have the resources to deal with the infrastructure deficit that we're facing, both, and exactly as you note, underground infrastructure, as well as our community infrastructure, schools, community centers, parks. And so those are really important conversations. I don't think we've necessarily landed them at this point, but it's certainly something we're having in an ongoing way, both with the provincial government and with the federal government. To some extent, the province is recognizing this through their new legislative framework around development finance. And so there is some of that built in, but certainly sort of development contributions alone are not going to address the need for infrastructure.
Thank you. That's all I have for questions.
Great. Thank you very much. And that's the end of the councillor. Pardon? All right. We still need to hear from the public, though. Is that correct? Great. So we're now going to hear from the public. Before we hear from registered speakers, I'd like to remind council and members of the public that individual speakers may speak for up to 3 minutes. Those speaking on behalf of 4 or more persons or groups, including the speaker, may speak for up to 5 minutes, and only if those represented are also on the phone line or in person, and must not be individual speakers themselves. Council may not ask questions of speakers. Speakers should state whether they are in support or in opposition of the recommendations and may only speak once. I'll also ask if speakers are residents of Vancouver if it's not noted on the speakers list. Following the last speaker on the speakers list for each item, we will go back through the list. Hearing voices. All right, we'll go back through the list of those who were not present when their name was initially called. I also want to remind council, speakers, and observers to be respectful as we hear comments. No form of discrimination is accepted or tolerated. Vancouver's procedure bylaw prohibits council members from the use of words, tone, manner of speaking, or gestures that express a negative view of the character of any person or groups of people. Members of the public are expected to not engage in improper conduct, which includes the use of expressions that promote hatred or are defamatory, as outlined under Section 7.8 of the Procedure Bylaw. The creation of a safe and inclusive environment for the public, team members, and council to participate is all of our responsibility. Okay, so we're gonna now begin with our first speaker, Jean Swanson. Jean, are you on the line?
Hello?
Hello. Please go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Jean Swanson. I'm a Vancouver resident. I'm with the Carnegie Housing Project. We have a report at carnegiehousingproject.ca that calls for stopping the loss of shelter rate units, building new units low-income people can afford, and opening shelters and tiny homes in the meantime so homeless folks can be treated humanely. Our report predicts that Vancouver homelessness will increase to about 4,700 by 2030. Since we researched the report, the number of folks with no fixed address has increased from about 3,150 to 3,500. With SRO vacancy control, thank you, it could be about 1,000 lower, but that won't solve homelessness. Speaking here today because I think it's urgent to make 2 points in public and to get action on them. Number one, we need more pressure on senior governments, especially the feds, who've been really bad about low-income housing, to put more money into non-market housing that low-income people can afford, so that social housing doesn't literally exclude low-income folks because of their high rents. It would be great if this council worked hard to get more senior government money, especially for shelter-rate housing, maybe using the UBCM and FCM. The second crucial point is we need way higher unit targets for low-income and homeless people than are in this report. For example, the provincial target for supportive housing is 583 in 5 years. In 5 years, we could lose over 700 supportive modulars if you don't find sites for them, over 100 more than we'll get. Meanwhile, there's over 3,400 people on the Vancouver supportive housing wait list. They'll be worse off, not better. Example 2, there's thousands of city residents on social assistance, disability, or pensions and can only afford about $500 a month for rent. Tens of thousands more have incomes below $40K or 30% below Hills. No private sector apartment rents will trickle down so they can afford it. We desperately need non-market housing with deep subsidies. Appendix C has a target of 1,411 units over 10 years for homelessness. This disgracefully low target will condemn thousands to continued homelessness. No level of government is treating homelessness with the urgency it requires. One policy change that could reduce homelessness drastically would be to get the feds and provinces to align their definitions of social housing and their funding of social housing with the Downtown East Side definition, which requires 1/3 of social housing to be at shelter rate. So we would urge you to tell the province its targets are way too low, to create city targets that actually meet the need of ending homelessness, and then work fiercely to get the federal and provincial funds to implement the targets.
Wow, thank you very much, Jean. Right on 3 minutes. It's good to hear your voice again. Okay, the next speaker in the queue is Sadie's Shotha. Sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Honorable Mayor and the Council, my name is Satwant Kaur Sahara. I live in City of Vancouver. We built our home in 1987. A few years later, patios started leaking. We asked the city for a permit. We were told that we could cover our patio, but if our neighbors complained, the city would have to ask us to take it down. We protected our home and our neighbors had no issue for 35 years. Last year, when city officials visited our house for Airbnb inspection, the city had multiple issues with our home. Although we didn't do anything our neighbors didn't do, because of the cost of the housing, people have turned their basement suites into illegal suites and to rent it out. One of our suites, my mother-in-law lives in, the other suite is rented out. And when I asked the city, I was told, do you want us to go after all of your neighbors? I say yes, or find a solution. Instead of harassing random people, my city has set a precedent to allow this to happen for years and ongoing. It worked well when slave owners and colonizers wanted to harass poor citizens and slaves. It doesn't work anymore. Does the city want me to file a complaint about all the homes built between 80s and mid-2000s and take those well-needed units to be knocked, the kitchens to be knocked down? Is that how the city will help bring more affordable homes to the city? I am in the process of getting signatures from the citizens to make this decision if our elected officials are not doing their job. The first issue the city had was that city wants us to knock down the whole enclosure on our patio and apply for a permit, but there's no process to get a permit. We can appeal, but city encourages us not to appeal because it's too expensive. And I don't know who these people, appeal board members are, and why are they so expensive, and why is the process so lengthy? And the number two issue is that city also wants us to get our units legalized. One unit is permitted to be legalized. So either we have to stop renting our unit or my mother-in-law has to lose her independence. She has to depend on us to cook for her, care for her, whatever that she needs in her kitchen. So what we can only apply, and the West Side has bylaw where they can have multiple units in one home, and Ontario does too. But why not East Vancouver? Is East Vancouver too poor to have rights?
And I apologize, you're at time.
Oh, already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. But thank you for coming in. The next speaker we have is Robin Tevender. Hey, Robin.
Hello. Oh, there's something in front of the clock here. I don't want to touch the city laptop. Could you move that so I can see the clock? Oh, pardon me. There we go. Yeah, so thank you. Just going to start off by reading from Appendix A, page 3 of 16, Housing Target Progress Report Form. Reporting requirements, Part 3, Section 4 of the Act and Section 5 of the regulation requires that the progress report must be received in a meeting that is open to the public. And again, I know I've talked about this before. It may seem like it's my hobby horse, but today my understanding from the security staff downstairs is that the doors are locked due to a protest outside and that observers are not really being admitted to this meeting. So I strongly contest whether this is actually an open and public meeting. What the security staff told me was that if I wasn't on the speakers list, they just wouldn't have let me in. So I don't know if that's a public meeting or not. But what I really wanted to talk about, and I think there's a lot of thoughtful and good information in this report, I think it outlines sort of the way our housing situation is going, and I'm going to tell a sort of collage story that involves several people I know, but I don't think it's horribly uncommon. So I have a friend who died of cancer at 34, and she's survived by her husband and one child. Her husband is her high school sweetheart, or was her high school sweetheart, so I don't know everything about this hypothetical collage relationship I'm going to talk about here, but one of the reasons for their delay of having children until they were in their early 30s was the economic situation. I know I had several conversations with this person, and so maybe if 3-bedroom housing or 2-bedroom even were more accessible, people would be able to reproduce earlier, and then God forbid something happens to someone, there are still some kids there, which, you know, we've sort of gone from the state being a family homeowner association to a sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion machine, and I think there are decent arguments for that, but like I just, looking at the numbers here, like even 3 bedrooms, where do you put Granny if she's sick? You know, my grandmother broke her hip toward the end of her life. She had to stay with us because she had to recover from having hurt her hip when she had surgery. So I just strongly question whether this is a really good system of architecture. I mean, from what I understood city staff saying, what if it were that 80% of the population, absent the economic situation, would want to have replacement levels of children? Well, these targets, I don't think, with respect to the previous speaker, about how, yes, homelessness is an issue, but what we really need is more housing for people to have families in, because it's just a crying shame, I think, when people can't afford to have families, and that's really the problem. It's not that they don't want to have children, it's not that they don't want to start reproducing earlier in life, it's that we have an economy that no longer values family and human reproduction as the name of the game in our little homeowner association. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for coming on in. Okay, that is the end of our speakers list. Would someone like to move a motion? Councillor Kirby-Young, Councillor Joe seconded. Council, is there any discussion? Seeing none. Okay, oh, sorry. Councillor Carr.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make a few points here. First of all, I'm actually grateful the British Columbia government stepped in on what is a major crisis and certainly affecting even growing number of people. I'm also happy they included other municipalities, and I think it will take some pressure off Vancouver to have the other municipalities working together with us on the delivery of more housing. I really wanted to make sure I was on the list to speak to thank our staff. I think we have phenomenal staff on the housing file, and I'm very proud of the work that's done. And I know you go and speak at conferences, and you work with the federal and the provincial governments. It's solid work, and thank you for that. I love the Housing Vancouver strategy. It's one that really does outline a focus on how we're going to get to the right supply, to how we're going to get to the kind of housing that's going to meet the needs, the diverse needs, especially those at lower incomes, the most vulnerable of people in our city. And thank you to Jean Swanson for calling in, because she's very focused on those who are in the most marginal and vulnerable of positions. I am still very concerned about affordability and how we're going to get to it, especially if we don't get more money from the federal government. Honestly, I have to agree with Jean on this, that I've seen other countries where the federal government does step up to the plate, and that is what's needed in terms of the resources to increase the supply of that affordable housing. That's the most need. I mean, it's amazing for me to go to Europe and hear people not worry about housing, to feel secure their whole lives, to have housing that will be affordable for them. It's what a refreshing milieu to be living in. I think that the market is always going to be under stress and face difficulties in terms of delivering the housing we need. I am very focused on the need to balance the market housing, which will deliver certainly some housing that is desirable and purchased or rented, with the need to focus on what is not supplied by the market, because only government can do that. The market won't, by definition, won't be delivering non-market housing. So I'm very happy for that focus, for that very practical reason. So just to say, I'm looking forward to the reports as they come forward. It's only the beginning. Good explanation as to why we didn't reach the goals now. That was based on past decisions, but now we have the chance to make the honed-in decisions to get to the supply that we need. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Meisner.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I also would like to echo Councillor Carr's thank you to staff for all of your work on the targets, the report, and also all the other work you're doing on speeding up and simplifying the permit process, the review of the city-wide design guidelines, which I'm glad to hear today that there is a belief that will also help move the needle. I think, we have a council here that is aligned on doing everything we can to speed up the delivery of housing. So working together, I know we can get there, and we can still make movement on factors within the city's control. There are, of course, external factors which we heard about today, which we don't have control over, but we do have an aligned council committed to delivering more housing faster. So I am confident that we can get there, and I look forward to the report and the strategy coming forward this June, outlining our new 3-year action plan. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Mayor. And similarly, I'll echo the thanks by my colleagues, Councillor Meisner and Councillor Carr, with respect to the staff's work. We're fortunate that the City of Vancouver was, as I noted earlier, leading the way in this space. And the staff noted actually goes further back than 2017, as I cited, in terms of having housing targets and having a housing strategy. But I do appreciate still an immense amount of work to advance these changes so quickly. Also recognizing that our council has been driving change around permitting, around deregulation, around zoning changes in order to address the housing issues we're facing in the city, both in terms of attainability and as well as affordability. Just noting on the provincial targets, again, big takeaway from what I heard from staff was that in order to get to those deeper levels of affordability, particularly the targets around units at Hills rate or below, is that we're going to have to work in partnership with the provincial federal governments to get the deeper levels of affordability. And I think another takeaway is that there needs to be ongoing dialogue and advocacy on the part of council and other municipal councils around infrastructure. Because again, they go hand in hand in terms of as we densify, as we grow, as more people come to live in our city, we need to have both that underground infrastructure as well as those other community amenities like our community centers, schools, parks that people enjoy. And what I hope is we get to a place where we can achieve that together, and that not meeting housing targets is seen as punitive in some way, that at the end of the day, we're all rowing together, we're all trying to address the housing crisis, and by establishing targets for each municipality to attain, there's also a bigger conversation about how do we work together to get the right infrastructure in place to support those new residents, both in the City of Vancouver and other municipalities. So I'm happy to advance the report today, but thank again our staff for the work on this.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be brief just to sort of articulate a couple of points. And that really is, I think as was mentioned, that I don't think Vancouver had an approval problem, but there is a challenge with respects to time and permitting. And so I think what the provincial targets have done have shone a spotlight on what we're doing well and where we have an opportunity to improve. And certainly we had shifted our tenure type to rental. We saw a record delivery of rental units, I think the highest in the last decade in 2023, which is where we were looking to move. We know that we need to create and deliver more supply. We know that the attainability and affordability piece is the challenge, and that is where we need help and support. I think I am concerned about the intersection with, and I'm looking forward to that report in June, but in terms of us analyzing how we can, as a city, work towards additional levers, and staff are going to bring back ideas I heard in June to support the affordability piece. But every time we are giving, we're prioritizing, I should say, affordability, such whether it's inclusionary zoning or otherwise, we are doing that at the cost of something else, which is typically giving up community amenities and other things that help us to support growth and build communities with amenities that people need and they want to live in. And we have, and it's not just as simplistic as the new infrastructure, it's about investing in and repairing the old. It's been identified we have a $500 million annual gap in our infrastructure deficit because new residents use that as well. And they want to go to take their dog to the dog park and put their kid in swimming lessons at the community center. And all of those things, and it's challenging for us to do that. And I don't think that we fully know yet, because there's a lot of work for staff to analyze, but what the full impact is going to be on our ability to fund and support those amenities with the changes around DCLs, CACs, et cetera, the complexity of having Metro Vancouver charging them now because there's only so much money in the pot. And pro formas are challenging to deliver, and now there's an additional cost input to consider, which if you can only take so much money out of the pot, then it logically means that potentially the City of Vancouver can't take as much. So in the times where we can, on a strata building, for example, versus a rental, we may be limited by having other DCL, CAC regulations in the region. And when we are prioritizing things like below market units, we're limited in getting the dollars in. So I'm going to flag that as, I think, a very live issue that we need to really determine the impacts of the legislation and be reflecting back to the province through the work and the analysis that staff are doing about what that really looks like. But I think I think the other thing that I'll touch on quickly that's really important is in terms of what we can control. We know we've got tough economic conditions, is that time is money. Every month, it's longer it takes to get approvals. There's more carrying costs that adds to the challenge of getting a project delivered over the line, either finished and completed, or in terms of providing the more affordable units. So I really appreciate the work that is being done on the 331 in terms of speeding up permitting and approvals. And I kind of think that that's one of the areas that Vancouver has the ability to shine. Let's build on our strength in the fact we have delivered a strong number of housing approvals and look at trying to lead the way in terms of getting projects more quickly through the system. And so that work becomes even more important in terms of the impact of that and sort of highlighting what's already happening, but really focusing on streamlining regulations, reducing number of policies, reducing roadblocks, all of those kinds of things. So I appreciate the work. I know there's a lot more to come, but I think that Vancouver's in doing a pretty good job within challenging conditions. The question is, let's do our part and let's identify what the other partners need to do, because housing, as I said earlier, is a team sport and it's going to need everybody to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clausen.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm also being very happy to receive this report from staff and thank them for the incredible work towards getting to where we are today. I just want to recognize on, I guess the second, her last day is, I believe, tomorrow, Andrea Law, the general manager for our development permits branch, and she has done incredible work in terms of in adopting digital transformation, working on our 3331 initiative, and that's going a long way for us to try and improve our overall efficiency and performance. So hats off to Andrea, and thanks for all your great work there. I do take away from our conversation that we've had this afternoon is that, you know, we are really duty bound to work closely with industry, listen to them as much as we have, but perhaps even more because the pressure's on to try and achieve some of these targets. I think we're going to have to, over time, show some flexibility in terms of responding to the market, but also making sure that we hit all the targets, including attempting to or reaching those HILS targets that are set up for us. But maybe in the short term, we do look at issues around the relaxation on BMR. I'm not saying that that is a decision we need to make, but I'm just looking at all of these options that are on the table for us to try and meet these targets. Including looking at some of our large sites and perhaps finding ones that we can get a lot of units of housing built. There's going to be huge pressure on the labor and materials market. It's been pretty much happening and growing for the last couple of years, but I think with all of the municipalities all pushing in the same direction, trying to build more housing faster, we're going to be experiencing that. So it's again going to require us to be nimble and responsive. And I think finally, I just want to recognize the importance of communities and neighborhoods that are seeing new housing coming into their communities. While I do feel like the public has shifted very strongly for in a very strong understanding of the need for us to build more housing faster, it is a lot of change for some communities, and so I want just to acknowledge their acceptance and their patience, and the fact that we are trying to listen to them and make sure that we are prioritizing areas where we can build the most units possible and have the least displacement and disruption. So anyway, just again, once again, happy to receive this report and thank our staff team for all the work that they're doing, and look forward to the updates as these numbers increase in the months and years ahead. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And yeah, team, thank you very much for all the work you put into this. It's a pretty heavy lift. It's appreciated. Okay, a reminder that any committee member participating virtually whose video is disabled will be marked absent for the vote pursuant to section 14.13 of the procedure bylaw. I'm now going to call a vote. Clerk, can you please take us to the voting screen? Council, please register your vote.
Mayor, this is Councillor Boyle. Can I get a vote assist in favor?
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Great. And it passes unanimously. Great. So that completes the item. May we have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Joe, seconded by Councillor Fry. I think you put your hand up. Is that right? Awesome. Thank you. All those in favor say yay. All those opposed say nay. Great. Motion carries unanimously. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Go Canucks, go.